This wild rose does not shy away from scandal. The very first scene of The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City is our introduction to Whitney, who we meet as someone who is really owning the scandal that got her excommunicated from the LDS Church. My name is Laura, this is Housewives Biographies, a viral series I've been hosting on TikTok that I am now updating and elaborating on for YouTube. You can subscribe and follow along. Whitney is the 8th and final of the Salt Lake City biographies in the series. We will continue with other franchises. Whitney is originally from Utah, and we understand her family to have a long lineage within the LDS Church. She and Heather are third cousins. Their common ancestor was the bodyguard to Joseph Smith. A fun aside, Angie Harrington, who was a guest and friend of during seasons 2 and 3, is also part of this Joseph Smith family tree. Now, Whitney was married for the first time when she was 21 years old. Her husband was on the BYU basketball team. That wedding was in 2007, and this was also the year that she started working for Nu Skin. This is like a direct sales, at least MLM adjacent role. When I shared this biography on TikTok, everyone said, oh, that's definitely just MLM. They make skincare devices, supplements. This job is where she meets Justin Rose, the man that would eventually become the husband that we meet on Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. Both Whitney and Justin are married at the time. When we meet them on the show, it is framed that Justin was her boss, but on his LinkedIn, looking at his role in Nu Skin, he's labeled as a president of this company. But again, because it's like direct salesy, more MLM adjacent, it seems like a lot of people had similar titles. So I'm not exactly sure what Justin would have been doing in this job or like how closely they would have actually been working together. But at the minimum, we know that he was in some sort of significant position of power. Whitney left the company in 2009. Justin stayed until 2010. That year that she leaves Nu Skin, 2009, is the year that Whitney and Justin are married. She tells us that at their wedding, she was 5 months pregnant. She wore her high school prom dress. They've described this wedding as having about 50 people in the audience, and not everyone was happy to be there. A lot of this information is shared during Whitney's introduction on Real Housewives of Salt Lake City on the very first episode. In fact, one of the very first scenes, if not the first scene. Whitney and Justin are doing a 10-year vow renewal. They use a lot of this similar language in their marriage, bringing a lot of heartbreak to the people around them. And especially since then, they've continued to emphasize how happy they are together and how thankful they are, even though their relationship caused a lot of heartache to other people. We know that Whitney and Justin have 2 children together. Justin also has 3 children from his previous marriage. Now, a little bit on Justin. Justin graduated from BYU, and after that role at Nu Skin, where he left in 2010, he continued in this kind of like direct sales, MLM adjacent space. Kind of the same industry, all businesses focused on wellness, beauty, supplements. This is super Utah. And we've also alluded to this a little bit on the most recent season where Whitney is talking about losing her business or her business that failed, and she's trying to merge it with an industry that Justin already knows. It's this more like MLM, direct sales, pyramid scheme style of business. On Whitney's career, after she left Nu Skin, there's obviously a gap in her resume. She goes on to have 2 children after this role. Whitney went back to school in 2014. Or I guess I should clarify, I believe that she went back to school because we understand that she was in school this time for 2 years. So I'm assuming when she originally went to college at BYU after she got married, she did not go back to school. If anyone knows more, please feel free to clarify. From 2014 to 2016, Whitney attends St. Mary's College in California. I think this is interesting not only because she left Utah, but because St. Mary's College is a Catholic institution. It's not incredibly surprising, but I do think it's interesting that she chose a university with a religious affiliation because at this point, she and Justin would have left the LDS Church. Again, because of the circumstances surrounding their marriage. After graduation, Whitney goes back into the direct sales space. It seems like she was pretty good at this, not just because she's going back into the industry, but I found some press release announcing her as an account manager with Envision Communications. It seems like she's being praised for her work in the industry. Around this time is also when she starts Iris and Beau. She doesn't leave that formal direct sales role until 2017 when she goes all in on Iris and Beau, her beauty company. Iris and Beau was a brand that primarily marketed themselves as a clean beauty brand. I actually followed them on Instagram before she was even on Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. It was primarily skincare, and again, it came about at a time where clean beauty was still so new and exciting and novel, and there wasn't a lot of saturation in the space. There wasn't really makeup products at the time, and it seems like this was a more traditional, like direct-to-consumer company. I do think the beauty industry makes sense for their marriage, considering Justin's background in the beauty and wellness space. Speaking a little bit about Whitney's parents, we meet Whitney's father on on season 1 of the show. Whitney shares at that point that she and her father have had an extremely strained relationship for the last 10 years or so. She shares with us that her father has struggled with addiction. He owned a hair salon and he was a self-made millionaire. And she shares that he lost it all due to his addiction. We haven't really heard about their relationship since. And I have seen some interviews where Whitney has shared that she and her father really have not had contact since we saw him on the show. I do think during those seasons that we saw them together in the very beginning of the show, she and her father go to Mary's church, and it seems like they're really working towards a resolution or like working towards bettering their relationship. The only little bit that we've heard about Whitney's father since season 2, I suppose, has been during this most recent season finale, during the impromptu intervention of Meredith. Whitney makes a comment that she has seen a lot of these behaviors that she's seeing in Meredith with her father as he was going through addiction. A little bit about Whitney's mom. We do see her in the background of some scenes, but I don't feel like we've gotten a lot of direct contact with her on the show. Like, we definitely haven't gotten to know Whitney's mom in the same way that we got to know Whitney's dad. Similarly, I found some interviews where Whitney is sharing that she and her mom have started to repair their relationship as she has distanced herself from her father. We learned during seasons 4 and 5 a little bit more about abuse that Whitney endured as a child. She doesn't share explicit details about this abuse or the details of this abuse, but she says that she has moments in her childhood that she has completely blacked out. And actually, her brother had to bring this trauma to her attention. She shares on the show that she got a phone call from her brother, and her brother was doing some sort of like intensive therapy. And her brother remembered all of these things that he saw happen to Whitney. We do meet him on the show, and he starts unpacking some of this trauma on camera. Whitney at that point had been going to therapy on her own, but it sounds like maybe she started participating in more intensive therapy. And she shares a lot on the show when she starts talking about her healing journey, not only in leaving the church, but in learning about this trauma that she endured as a child. She shares this in kind of like parallel conversations in the scenes where we are seeing her brother. So timing wise, it kind of sounds like she heard about this from her brother, kind of immediately started doing the work in therapy. And by the time we see her in confessional reflecting on these scenes, she has already started to go through those more intensive therapy experiences. Around this time, we also hear about Whitney removing her name from the LDS church records. She kind of clarifies, mostly for the audience, that she and Justin were not formally actually excommunicated. They have used the word excommunicated from the LDS church in the past, but she clarifies that she felt very excluded, very shunned, and they chose to walk away from the church. And for that reason, they still need to like go through the formal motions of removing their names from the LDS church. A little bit on my personal opinions of Whitney and also her dynamic in this cast. I shared on my video of Heather, which is up and posted by the time you're seeing this. The relationship that Whitney and Heather have is very important to the structure of the show. I think even on the surface level, it's interesting to see two cousins on a cast, but their relationship has ebbed and flowed a lot over the course of the last 6 seasons. It's definitely not positive all the time, and we have seen Whitney and Heather have some really intense fights on camera. On the flip, we have also seen them have these really deep, touching moments where they need each other. At the beginning of the show, both Heather and Whitney are starting to question who they are without the church, even though they had been removed for quite some time. And I think that depth of religious conversations is really important to the show of Salt Lake City. With the wider cast, I do find generally across the last 6 seasons that Whitney has been kind of belittled by the rest of the women, perhaps because of her age. I really feel like the other women talk to Whitney as if she is so much younger than them, but I don't feel like she's that much younger that they can't like take her seriously or respect the way that she's interacting with them. So I think that's where a lot of her frustration comes from when she has these kind of like blow up moments in group scenes. And Whitney, to me, also does this thing where she kind of to some extent acts like an audience surrogate. She investigates things. She calls people out, I think, because she is so invested in like uncovering the truth. I'm sure some of that, of course, is really deeply tied to this healing journey and the continued work that we have seen her do on herself. She's just really interested in like getting to the bottom of stuff. There are definitely times where I feel like she can handle herself better in conversations, but I also think some of the chaos that Whitney brings is just like part of reality television today. That's Housewives, like that's the theatrics, the performance of the show. But yeah, when she's in that wider group, I feel like her role is really to uncover things. And maybe for that reason, I think that Whitney gets to act a little independently of the women. So historically on this show, I feel like we've seen a lot of solo scenes of Whitney working through personal challenges. Whereas with a lot of other women, when we see solo scenes, they're talking about their interactions with at least one other woman on the show. Whitney is again talking about her trauma. She's talking about challenges in her marriage. We know that her husband, Justin, lost one of his roles because of the way that their marriage showed up on camera during this like more intimate painting scene. Now, on a totally different note, I think something fun about the character of Whitney and how she performs for this cast is that Whitney and Justin are pretty upfront with their financial struggles. I think sometimes that makes for a really good character. Breaking that wall with the audience, a woman almost explicitly saying, this is a job for me. I need the check that comes from being on a Real Housewives. Whitney knows she has to participate. I think that is where a lot of the theatrics come from too. Alternatively, I do think this makes the audience more aware of when things feel a little manufactured, like if she is making up something for the sake of having a storyline, any challenges in her marriage, for example. But again, I feel like there's been so much going on historically with Whitney in her personal life that she hasn't really had to like make up a lot. Maybe she dramatizes for the show. Maybe she heightens some of her experiences and reflections, but I don't feel like anything lands as fake. On Whitney's contribution to the cast dynamic, I think I have a little bit of a hot take. I feel like Whitney has really delivered, especially in the first half of this most recent season. When this season started, after the first few episodes, I felt very strongly that we were seeing a shift in the character of Whitney. Across all franchises, it's great to have a woman on a cast who serves as a voice of reason, like some relatively neutral character that can move the story along. I don't think that's what Whitney is doing. Across franchises, we also see women who play this mentor role, giving advice, whether prompted or unprompted, and really serving as this like all-knowing voice in the group. I don't think either of these are exactly what Whitney is doing, but by comparison, I think Whitney has taken on a little bit more of a sage character role. So for example, a really important conversation that we saw this season was between Whitney and Bronwyn. Bronwyn approaches Whitney at a lunch, sharing that she and her husband are having some challenges where he is perhaps stepping out on her emotionally. And Bronwyn kind of indirectly asks if Whitney and her husband have some sort of arrangement in their marriage. And the conversation just continues from there. I thought this conversation was like incredibly honest, incredibly real, and it felt like a very important scene to include in the show, even for the sake of like the social anthropology that is reality television. It offered some insight on like a very specific kind of marriage. And whatever motivations that Bronwyn had in bringing this up, Whitney was absolutely the right person to bring it up to. Neither of them are explicitly saying what their arrangements are or what they'd like them to be, but Whitney is ultimately validating Bronwyn in saying that the romantic element of your marriage, or like the sanctity of monogamy, does not have to be the most important part of your marriage. Whitney served in a similar role this season when we saw her and Brittany at that plant shop. Brittany is talking about challenges she has with her daughters and how her daughters want her to step away from her romantic relationship. Whitney is effectively like holding up a mirror to Brittany and asking her, is this the person you want to be? Is this the kind of mother that you want to be? She literally puts her hands on Brittany. Towards the end, Whitney is even like, I need you to understand like how serious this is for the relationship you have with your daughters. She wants Brittany to make her own decision, but she wants Brittany to like think really hard about that decision. Keeping both of these scenes in mind, I think there has been times in previous seasons when Whitney has been labeled a pot stirrer or like creating drama just for the sake of drama. I don't think that's exactly what it is. I think it all goes back to this healing journey that we've seen her on for years now. She's ultimately interested in uncovering the truth. We've only seen her get like truly heated twice on this most recent season. One was at Lisa Barlow's Clarity luncheon, that legal luncheon where she had dismissed all over her legal documents. And even then, Whitney's moment of chaos and blowing up was because she felt like Lisa was misrepresenting herself. We similarly saw Whitney like very involved in this impromptu intervention of Meredith on the season finale. And she's similarly using those words like wake up. All of the women are using the word spiraling, the implication being that Meredith is having some sort of substance abuse issues. And again, whatever Whitney's motivations in being involved in this are, she's using that similar language of like, is this the person you truly are? And then even on the note of like confrontation in the cast, the only time on the most recent season that we saw Whitney being confronted with something was on that yacht. Meredith is upset that Whitney and Brittany were looking at those TikToks that were making allegations about her husband, Seth. Whitney's response to this is not that she was like participating or encouraging the conversation, but again, that she wanted Brittany to make the right decision or make the decision for herself in confronting Meredith. The same sort of situation, she believes herself to be not like telling anyone what to do, but she wants to be giving advice. She feels like she has some sort of influence on decision making. I think even beyond this, there is like a little bit of a generational divide in how Whitney presents herself compared to how the other women present themselves, maybe because of age. I know I just said like Whitney is not that much younger than the rest of them, but she's clearly thinking very differently about the platform of reality television when the show starts. Whitney is very committed to taking full responsibility, fully taking charge of how she is presented on camera. The very first scene of the show, again, is Whitney's vow renewal. She's talking about meeting her husband while she's married to someone else, while her husband is her boss. She's owning the scandal. In the first episode of this most recent season, when the women are going on that like RV camping trip, Whitney is being poked by Brittany asking about her businesses, and Whitney blows up to say, I don't really want to talk about it because I failed. I let people down. I let myself down. I lost a lot of money. People lost their jobs. For all of her faults and all of her challenges, Whitney is someone who has consistently wanted to like be in front of her narrative. I said something similar during our Bronwyn video. Both of them feel like people who want to get ahead of any sort of scrutiny. Whitney would rather be the one breaking the news about herself. I think this is kind of common across franchises with some younger housewives on the cast. There's this kind of understanding that like if you are not the one telling your truth to the world on reality television, it's gonna come out anyway. You might as well be the one to write the narrative. I think we'll pause there with Whitney Rose. This has been the final installment of the Housewives Biographies subseries on Salt Lake City. Again, we are gonna move on to other franchises. I'm so happy about this. I'm so proud. These videos were really fun when I was initially putting them together on TikTok, and it's been so fun to continue these conversations, to update them with like current happenings on television. I love the opportunity to look at someone's backstory and just like kind of try to better understand like why they make the decisions that they do or why they interact in the way that they do. And I'm a very firm believer in reality TV serving as a bit of social anthropology. We've heard before that The Real Housewives is the longest running record we have of women over the age of like 35, especially the dynamic of women in groups, which is honestly kind of insane to think about. But yes, thank you so much for following along. Thank you so much for participating. Make sure you're subscribed so you can keep up as the series continues. And I'll talk to you very soon. Bye.